Hey guys, it's me, Kari, and if you're paying attention to my Storytime with Kari series, you will know I finished our first complete novel yesterday. It was Homecoming by Cynthia Voigt, and this book is the sequel, Dicey's Song, and both of them are books that I have loved since I was in 5th grade, so probably about 10 years old. But they're just as meaningful to me as an adult as they were when I was a kid, perhaps even more so because I understand things more. But anyway, because you guys did ask me to continue this series, here we go with Dicey's Song. This one is accurate because it shows Dicey with short brown hair the way she's supposed to be, as opposed to the other cover that showed her with long blonde hair, which totally contradicted the description of her in the book. There's a little intro, and then let's see how long chapter 1 is. Hopefully we'll be able to get through all of chapter 1, but perhaps not. No, I don't think so. I think we're gonna have to, we're gonna have to split chapter 1 into 2 sections, I think, because the chapters are a little bit longer, so I will try to find a natural place to stop. But here we go. Okay, here's the intro part. What a day, Dicey thought. What a summer, for that matter, but especially what a day. She stood alone in the big old barn in a patch of moonlight, stood looking at the sailboat resting on its sawhorse, sorry, that's hard to say, cradle, a darker patch among shadows. Behind her, the wind blew off the water, bringing the faint smell of salt and the rich, moist smell of the marshes. You never knew where a road would end, Dicey thought, the breeze curling around her ears. You just knew that roads ended. Not like water, which always kept moving. Not like the stars, tossed out across the sky. The stars had made that light millions of years ago, and already they were burning with new light. And the moon, too. The moon would swell and dwindle, go dark and swell again. But the Tillmans traveled on a road, and roads ended. Dicey's road, and James's, and Maybeth's, and Sammy's had ended here. The Tillermans' road had rolled up against Graham's house, and they had tumbled off it into Graham's. Dicey grinned. Not exactly into Graham's arms, maybe. Not into her lap. Certainly into her life. So they were going to live here, on the rundown farm with Graham. Dicey's heart danced again inside her to say it to herself like that. Home. Home, with their mama's mama, who was also a Tillerman. Home. A home with plenty of room for the 4 children in the shabby farmhouse. Room inside, room outside, and the kind of room within Graham, too. Dicey had seen Graham, and how she listened when Maybeth sang, how she talked with James, how her eyes smiled at the things Sammy said and did. The kind of room that was what they really needed. One of the greatest lessons the long summer had taught Dicey was how to figure out what was really needed. Dicey studied her sneakers, gray with old grime, the places where her toes had worn through pockets of darkness. When she wiggled her toes in the moonlight shadows, she couldn't see anything moving. Home for Dicey, too, with the bay, the Chesapeake Bay, quiet with little waves and long tides. The bay just out of sight, with this grandmother whose character had sharp corners and unexpected turns, with the sailboat waiting here in the barn. She stepped into the darkness and placed both her hands flat against the rough hull of the boat, imagining how it would feel when the little boat rose on the water, how it would respond to the wind in its sails, to the waves sliding by, to her hand on the tiller. She leaned her forehead against the wood, feeling the solid curve of the hull against her skin. Unexpectedly, she found herself yawning, a huge, hollow yawn that stretched her diaphragm up against her heart and cracked the hinges of her jaw. Dicey smiled to herself. Here it was, probably the most exciting day of her life, certainly one of the best, and all she felt was tired, as if all the walking and worrying, all the hunger and hope of the long summer all hit her at once. Her bones sagged, and her brain couldn't grab onto any ideas. The muscles that... Excuse me, Venus! That's my very loud little cat. The muscles that that held, that's not very polite. The muscles that held her bones in working order ached, but not a hurting ache, kind of a contented throb. Venus. Psst, Venus. You have to be quiet, Mama's reading. She won't, I guarantee you, she'll meow again. Dicey yawned again. She guessed she'd better get to bed, but she guessed she knew why she didn't want to. This happiness blew through her like the wind, buoyed her up like water, and she wanted to float along on it. But the summer had worn her out, like it had worn out her sneakers, and tomorrow she'd have to start school. But on the weekend, she'd get the boat into the water and learn how to sail it. The long summer stretched behind them. They'd made it through, made it home. Okay, here's the start of chapter 1. And they lived happily ever after. Not the Tillermans, Dicey thought. That wasn't the way things went for the Tillermans, ever. She wasn't about to let that get her down. She couldn't let it get her down. That was what had happened to Mama. Dicey lay on her back under the wide-branched paper mulberry tree. She opened her eyes and looked up. The paper mulberry had broad leaves that had made a pool of shade in which she lay. Thick roots spread around her, making a kind of chair for her to lean on. She wore only shorts in the hot midday air. Her arms and chest were spattered and streaked with red paint, and the barn was completely painted, top to bottom, all 4 sides patched and painted and looking good. The paint and sweat were drying on Dicey's body. She could hear the buzzing of insects and nothing else. For once she was alone, but she knew where everyone was. Graham had taken James downtown in the motorboat. Graham was going to get groceries, and James was going to the library to find some books for Dicey on repairing and maintaining wooden boats. Maybeth was up in her room doing some of the many extra assignments her teacher gave her so she could catch up with the rest of the 3rd graders and not be kept back again. Sammy was out back on the other side of the old farmhouse, spading up fallow land to increase the size of the vegetable garden. Graham had said right off that they would have to do more planting next spring than she'd done for years, with 4 more people to be fed. Dicey suspected that Graham hadn't been sure how the children would feel about the work. Well, Graham would learn about them, and they would learn about Graham. There would be some surprises for everyone, Dicey guessed. She knew Graham had already been surprised at Dicey's reaction when her sailboat, the one she had hoped over and dreamed over, sank into the shallow water by Graham's dock. Even James was surprised by how calm she stayed, maybe because he had seen Dicey's face as they hauled it down the 1/4-mile path through the marsh, seen her strain and pull and check to be sure the wheels they'd removed from a wagon and fixed to the legs of the sawhorse cradle didn't fall off, seen how much it mattered to her. Dicey had watched the water pouring in through the leaks where the boards had shrunk apart with all those years of drying out. She had watched, they had all stood and watched, as the little boat filled up with water and settled quietly down onto the sandy bottom of the Chesapeake Bay. I should have remembered, Graham had said. I knew, if only I remembered. You can't sail in that, Sammy declared. Dicey had stared down at the chipped paint on the gunwales of the boat, which still showed above the water. The boat was her lucky charm, her rabbit's foot, her horseshoe, her pot of gold. It was the prize she'd set for herself for leading them from nowhere to somewhere. Venus! Shush! Okay, she said to herself, thinking about what needed to be done. They'd have to bail it out before they could get it out of the water. They'd have to take it back to the barn. She told James to find something to bail with. They'd have to slide the cradle back into the water. It would probably take all 4 children to do that. Hold, please. I have to calm my cat down. Sorry, guys. I'm going to try to find the same spot where I left off. Okay. Okay, she said to herself, thinking about what needed to be done. They'd have to bail it out before they could get it out of the water. They'd have to take it back to the barn. She told James to find something to bail with. They'd have to slide the cradle back into the water. It would probably take all 4 children to do that. You don't rest a minute, do you? Graham had said. Dicey shook her head. She had already gotten used to her grandmother's way of asking questions without question marks. But you'd do better to let it sit out here a day or so, Graham had advised. Let the wood soak up water to swell up again. I knew that once, but I forgot. I'm sorry, girl, she said. Dicey hadn't answered, just looked at Graham where she stood on the dock with the wind blowing her curly gray hair around her face. Dicey doesn't mind, as long as she knows what to do about things, Maybeth told Graham. Is that right? Graham asked Dicey. I guess so, Dicey said. What do you do when there's nothing you can do? Graham said. I don't know. I do something else, Dicey said. That doesn't make sense, James pointed out. That's illogical. Graham looked around at all of them. Which one of your sons built this boat? Dicey asked, but Graham had turned away to go back to the house and didn't answer. Remembering that scene, Dicey reminded herself that they all had a lot of learning to do. The boat was back in the barn, and she had to begin scraping off the old layers of paint, but not quite yet. Graham and James would be back soon, and they'd have lunch, and then Dicey wanted to go downtown to see about a job. She'd been thinking about what kind of job she could get, all those long first 3 days of school. There wasn't much else to think about in school. As far as she was concerned, about all school was good for was using up your days. Dicey hadn't talked to anyone, except to answer teachers' questions. That was okay with her, because she had important things to think about. Getting a job to bring in some money was one. Tillermans always needed more money because there were so many of them to feed. Dicey knew Graham worried about that. For that matter, Dicey worried about that too, and had worried all her life, because at 13 she was the oldest. That worry about food had been her single biggest worry all summer long, when they had traveled down here after Mama disappeared. The other worries, about what James was thinking, because what James thought in his head told him what to do, about whether or not Maybeth was retarded, as people claimed, or only shy, slow, and frightened, which was what Dicey thought, about why Sammy was so angry he hit out and didn't mind how much the person he fought with hurt him. Those worries. And worries about how much Dicey should give up for her brothers and sisters in order to have any kind of home together, or if she was driving them too hard, about how many miles they had covered and where they were ever going. All the other worries had come and gone. The worry about food had haunted her all summer long, and maybe it always would. There were still things to worry about here, but nothing crucial. James said everything was all right now. Now they could live with Graham. James was smart, but he wanted everything to be all right so badly that he couldn't see. Couldn't see what? Dicey asked herself. She hunkered up, resting her back against the tree. Couldn't see how big troubles had little beginnings, just like little troubles. Dicey heard voices approaching the house from behind. Nobody ever came up the front driveway. Graham didn't have a car and couldn't drive. She always went downtown in the motorboat. So except for the children's bicycles, the overgrown tracks that led off from the front of the house through a stand of pines and between two long barren fields to the road were unmarked. The voices came clearer. Lazily, Dicey stood up and went around to help carry in bags of groceries. When she got around back, Sammy had taken the extra bag in his grubby arms. His face appeared at the top, streaked with dirt. Dicey looked at him and grinned, and made a mental note to tell Graham that he was having his 7th birthday next week. James trailed up through the garden, carrying another bag. "You two are a mess," Graham announced before she even went up the back steps. She looked at Dicey and hesitated, as if deciding whether or not to say what she was thinking. "You're too old to go around half naked," she announced. "What do you mean?" Dicey demanded. "I am not." Graham was already in the kitchen. "Am I, James?" Dicey asked. "You know, Dicey," he said. His eyes shifted away from hers. At 10, he was old enough to be embarrassed. He hurried after Graham. Well, she guessed she did know. She guessed she had noticed when she had stripped off her t-shirt that her breasts seemed to be pointing out. Maybe. But she had convinced herself that wasn't true. Dicey shrugged. There wasn't much she could do about getting a bosom, but she didn't have to like it. Graham made a plate of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for lunch, and she had put out a bowl of apples. Dicey had washed off most of the paint with turpentine. Then she and Sammy rinsed off with a quick swim, and she had put her shirt on. Sammy's yellow hair was slicked down. James was on his 3rd sandwich, and Maybeth was still nibbling at her first. "How did it go?" Graham asked. "How many pages did you read?" 4, Maybeth answered softly without looking up. "That's not enough," she answered. Graham looked at Dicey, and Dicey sighed. "Is the book too hard?" Dicey asked her sister's bent head. Maybeth's hair was as bright as sunlight, and she tied it back with a red ribbon. "Where did you find the ribbon?" Dicey asked. "Graham got it for me," Maybeth said. She looked up at Dicey, then with a little smile. Dicey liked the way Maybeth looked, like an angel, a Christmas angel. It was partly her wide hazel eyes and her soft hair that curled gently at the ends, but more, it was the quiet ways she had. "I think it's pretty." "It is," Dicey assured her. She herself, like James, had their father's straight brown hair, which was about all they had of their father, that and the narrow face. Maybeth and Sammy looked like Mama, round and fair, but Dicey and James were mixes, yet all the Tillermans had hazel eyes. She couldn't remember the color of their father's eyes, or exactly what he looked like, just his voice. Not surprising, since she was 7 the last time she saw him. "Was the book too hard?" she asked again. Maybeth shook her head. "I have to keep working," Mrs. Jackson said, she told Dicey. "Only I can't remember what the words are, so I have to go back and memorize the lists again. If I work," Mrs. Jackson says, "everything will be all right." Dicey wanted to cooperate with this Mrs. Jackson. "We'll do fractions after dinner," she promised Maybeth, who nodded with no more enthusiasm than Dicey felt. "Is it okay if I go downtown this afternoon?" she asked her grandmother. "The barn is finished," she added, to distract her grandmother from any question about what Dicey wanted to do in town. Graham looked as if she knew Dicey wanted to distract her, but she didn't know why. She decided not to ask. "I'm pleased it's done," she said. "You don't sound pleased," Sammy pointed out. "Appearances," Graham declared, "can be deceiving." Sammy thought about that. "Why?" he asked. Graham snorted. Because you can't judge a book by its cover. Why not? Sammy wondered. And we are going to stop there because there is a little space. And then hopefully we'll be able to finish this chapter in the next section. Because I really want to try to keep the readings to like 20 minutes or less. So there's no chance that it's going to accidentally cut me off in the middle like it did a couple of times. I apologize for that. It's weird because it shows the video still recording, and it's not until after it's finished that it'll show like a minute or 2 minutes actually went into a separate video. I guess I have like a 30 to 33 minute time limit. So we're at like 15:36 right now, so we're okay with me rambling. But I hope you guys will enjoy this book as much as the other one. I'm really excited to enjoy it again with you guys. Like I said, this is a book that I've, you know, read. I read for the first time when I was 10, and I've read it many, many times since. But never out loud and never like 2 people. So it's kind of like a communal reading experience, so it's really fun for me. So anyway, thank you for watching. Feel free to give a thumbs up if you feel so inclined. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the bell icon for future upload notifications, and have an awesome rest of your day. I'll be back soon with more stuff. Bye guys.